Service, or NRCS. Here in Kalispell, we service Flathead County. If some of you don't know, the NRCS is a government agency under USDA, and we provide technical and financial assistance for on-the-ground private land conservation. So, and you guys can see my screen then, right? Okay. So a little overview of what I'll be going over. I'm going to kind of hit different things that could be lawn alternatives, alternatives to a traditional lawn, and kind of go over different options for people, since people might have very diverse situations right now. Not everything is applicable to everyone, so any one of these topics could probably have an hour-long presentation on them, but we're going to hit a bunch of different things and kind of go over them briefly, talk about different options. So we'll go over why to do lawn alternatives, identifying your goals and objectives, low-growing species for lawns, native grasses, creating a garden, creating a rain garden, creating pollinator and beneficial insect habitat, and going over shrub and tree plantings. So I liked this illustration. So why lawn alternatives? This kind of shows a traditional lawn with your monoculture of grass. Traditional lawns are the #1 irrigated crop in the US, covering about 40 million acres, and they take a lot of inputs. Like this picture shows, you have the mowing, so gasoline going into it, pesticides and fertilizers, and then just quite a bit of water. And so for an alternative lawn or lawn alternatives, you want to think about having more diversity, incorporating plants that take less water, are more drought tolerant, are more beneficial for wildlife and insect habitat. And this picture shows having just like trees, different low growing species. The purple is probably some kind of flowering plant, and just having trees and shrubs around. So when thinking about lawn alternatives, you want to think about what your goals are, what your situation is now, and how you can make your lawn more environmentally friendly, have less inputs into it. So yeah, you want to think about what you're doing now and what you want in the future, how much of your lawn you want to convert into something else, what kind of plants do you want? Do you want food producing plants? Do you want plants that are beneficial for wildlife? Do you want to attract insects? And then also, how much time do you want to devote to converting your lawn into an alternative lawn? All right, so here's some low growing species. So for here I have clovers, and I just have 2 in here. There are many other clovers that you could put into your lawn, but the 2 most common are Dutch white clover. This is already in a lot of lawns. Sometimes if people use like broadleaf herbicides, they'll not be in the lawns anymore. But clovers in general are good for a nitrogen source, reducing your inputs for fertilizer, and are a good source for pollinators. So the Dutch white clover you can interseed into a lawn to provide more diversity, just within an already existing lawn grass stand. Microclovers, you can do the same. You can interseed also, and I've also seen that you can convert your lawn totally into microclovers as a ground cover. They have less flowers than the Dutch white clover. It's a variety of the Dutch white clover, but is smaller, and kind of looks like a lawn from afar, but it's actually clovers. Um, and both of these require less water than your normal lawn grasses. And then we have ground covers. So there's a lot more ground covers than just these three. I just gave some examples. And so one that I see a lot of people using is creeping thyme. All these are low growing and form mats, like dense mats, and can spread. So when you put these in, you want to make sure they're in areas that have borders, or that you know where you want it to go, and kind of take it out of those other areas. A lot of people put these in between like rocks or walkways. And so creeping thyme can handle foot traffic, so you could put it in instead of like long grasses. It spreads quickly and is deer resistant. It also has flowers that attract bees, and is drought tolerant. And then Irish moss isn't as good with foot traffic, so this would be in areas that you don't want people to go necessarily. It does have blooms on it in the spring and is shade tolerant. And then you can put in a variety of other mosses. There's a lot of species of mosses, and there's a lot of species of native mosses to Montana. So if you were looking at going for more of a native route in your lawn, you could look into other mosses that are native to Montana, and a lot of those are fine with foot traffic, and also very drought resistant. Then I wanted to talk about bunch grasses. So all of these ones that I have are native to Montana. There's definitely other varieties of bunch grasses that can be planted. These could be planted along with flower plantings or in borders, somewhere that you don't really want to mow. And they provide wildlife habitat, and native grasses are very drought tolerant because of their deep root systems. So I have in here blue bunch wheatgrass, which is Montana state grass, and it grows up to 4 feet tall. And then I have little blue stem. There's different varieties for landscaping. This one grows 1 to 3 feet tall, and is a bluish color, maturing into reddish gold. And then Idaho fescue, which is drought tolerant and has a blue-green leaf and grows 1 to 3 feet tall. I also wanted to highlight, if you wanted to do an area of your lawn that you didn't want to mow and you wanted to have in a native grass mix, the Flathead Conservation District, along with NRCS, put together a mix that they have at CHS. There's a valley mix and a forest mix, and then the reclamation mix, which is more for like doing along like streams and things, areas of restoration. And so the picture I have here is of a planting that we did in Lake County. I worked in Lake County the past 3 years and just moved up here this past year. And this had native grasses in it along with forbs. So there's yarrow in there and flax. But I just wanted to show a picture of a mixture of grasses and forbs in an area that gets mowed maybe once or twice a year. And then you can also create a garden in areas of your yard. You could either take small areas, taking out corners, but just having food producing plants that create habitat. Um, these two pictures are examples of some gardens. Having a raised bed garden, you could put in a raised bed along a border. And then also the other picture is a larger garden with fruit producing trees on the edge, and then a pollinator planting in the corner. Yeah, so just putting in a garden can be a great way to use your yard for something else, produce food, and also provide habitat. But also gardens can be a little labor intensive, so it kind of depends on those goals that we talked about. And then I wanted to show you an example of adding their cover crops. So incorporating flowering plants or covering the soil in gardens is always a good thing. This is an example of someone that in Lake County that has a garden. They have it sectioned in quarters, and every year they rest a quarter of their garden, putting it into a cover crop with flowering species to attract insects and pollinators, and then rotate their garden around so that not every year they're having the garden in the same spot. It kind of replenishes the soil, gives back some organic matter. And then this one, the Flathead Conservation District already had a webinar on rain gardens. So if you wanted to put in a rain garden, you can definitely go back and look at that. But a brief overview of a rain garden. So this would be in areas that have naturally flowing water, so like a rain gutter downspout. And in the illustration, you can see as the runoff going to the right and then infiltrating through the plants and rocks, and then it would go back into the water system. So the idea is to dig out 1 to 2 feet and line it with large stones, and then you have these zones that are illustrated here with the water-loving plants in zone A. This would be things like sedges and rushes, skullcaps, and red osier dogwood. And then B, having plants that tolerate some flooding. These would be things like wild chives, red columbine, or horsemint. And then zone C, which is the drier zone, having a little water. And this would be things like twin flower, plains coreopsis, and paper birch. I don't know if you guys want to add anything in on rain gardens while we.
I think we can just address any questions that anybody has on rain gardens at the end. We can get really in depth if we want to, or just point folks towards additional resources on rain gardens.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks.
And then, so if you wanted to create pollinator habitat or beneficial insect habitat in your lawn, this is kind of giving you an idea of how to do that in all seasons. So having 2 to 3 blooms or more at all times. The illustration on the right shows different plants. The top is shrubs, the bottom is flowers, and shows different bloom times. The yellow is the bloom time. So the idea is if this was a mix, or if all of these were in your yard, that you'd have a variety of blooms of different colors and shapes and heights, all in your yard for habitat for insects. And then also making sure that if you want to provide pollinator habitat, that the plants that you're planting have pollen and nectar sources. Some very cultivated plants that have flowers don't actually have a great pollen source. So a lot of the native plants have great pollen and nectar sources, but just making sure that if that's your goal, that you have those plants in there. And then creating pollinator habitat for every season. So having the variety of blooms, so the early blooms, mid blooms, and then late blooms, but then also having overwintering habitat for insects, so keeping some twigs around. A lot of native bees require either mud, leaves, or twigs, or small holes sometimes that they overwinter in. So having those resources around if you're trying to encourage pollinators. And then I also wanted to highlight the Conservation District has a pollinator initiative where they give out free seed to landowners for, correct me if I'm wrong, 2,500 square feet. And this is the mix that they have. This was developed after a few years of testing out different species in Lake County, and then the western area conservation districts have this mix to give out to landowners. But it has, you can see a variety of different colors in the mix, and then it has both perennial and annual species. This is just because the annual species will usually establish pretty fast, and in those first 2 to 3 years, those will be the dominant species within the mix, and after that, the perennial species will start to take over and be more predominant in the mix. And I did want to say that you could also put a grass mix in with this, so you could incorporate this with a grass planting too, to have both grasses and flowering species. And I have a few pictures of just examples of some pollinator plantings and other things that I've seen from working around here. This is an example of a lady that planted one of the Lake County mixes along her driveway. And this is the 3rd year of the planting. And she said that this was the best year. A lot of plantings from seeds don't always look great in the first 1 to 2 years, but after 2 to 3 years, a lot of times they'll look great and have a lot of flowers. Sometimes there is a lot of work that is involved in those first or second years to get good plantings. You may have to, if there's a lot of weeds, you may have to mow before the weeds go to seed, things like that, to manage different plantings. And then this is an example of someone that was taking a garden out of production and wanted to just put it into pollinator habitat. So I guess thinking about areas, if you do have areas that are bare of soil, and you want to put something in there, maybe a pollinator garden is a good choice. And then this is an example of putting a pollinator garden in the edge of a garden. So this is just putting in a permanent pollinator habitat along the edge of a garden. And so this is just showing, so it was planted in April, and then on the left, it's pretty well established in June, and then in July, there's already flowering species, and so this was the first year. In the second year, there'd probably be flowering species even sooner, in June. And then these are two examples. So the one on the left is a lady that planted a pollinator mix that's just permanent in her garden. And then the one on the right is actually from my garden plot. And I just wanted to highlight, I usually go out and water pretty late at night, and I see many bumblebees and honeybees still out there at like 8 or 9 p.m. And I just have two small rows of these pollinator strips, and it seems to be working pretty well for providing resources for pollinators. And then this is another example of a larger scale pollinator planting with grass. And this one also, there are quite a few weeds in the first few years, so I guess just not getting discouraged by planting. You may have to do some mowing in the first few years, but after the third year, it looked like this. So the white in there is yarrow, and then there's some sandfoin, which is the pink. The blue is Lewis flax. So yeah, there's a lot of diversity in there. And then I wanted to highlight some shrubs that you could plant. Shrubs are great for early season blooms, also great for berries and attracting wildlife, also providing habitat and cover. So all of the species that I'll go over are native to Montana. There's golden currant. This is great for early season bloom, attracts hummingbirds. All of these are pretty low on water use. And then there's elderberry. And chokecherry. Elderberry and chokecherry both can spread from suckers, so from like the roots. So kind of looking into the plants that you want to plant to, whether there's things that you want to manage or if you want spreading species or not. And then I have silver buffalo berry. This can form dense thickets and is very drought tolerant. Birds love the fruits. They're not necessarily great to eat. They're sour, but birds do love them. And red osier dogwood. These are great for wildlife. The berries will usually hold on into the winter and provide a food source for wildlife. And service berries, which also birds love the fruits on service berries too. And then I just wanted to highlight some, so trees are obviously a great habitat for wildlife. So I have in here, you could do native tree plantings like Douglas fir and ponderosa pine, or fruit plantings. I just have a cherry in here because that's what I had. So any fruit plantings, planting an orchard, also provides blooms for pollinators, providing habitat and diversity. So that's all I had for that. I guess just going over everything again. So creating diversity within your lawn, and thinking of ways to convert your lawn into something that provides habitat for something else or is drought resistant. basically getting less inputs into the lawn, using less water, less fertilizer, um, whether that's through low growing species adding diversity to your lawn, or leaving areas with native grasses, planting native grasses, and leaving areas that you don't mow, creating a garden to produce food for yourself, um, creating a rain garden, helping to filter water, um, create a cleaner water source, creating habitat for insects, and creating habitat for animals too with trees and shrubs. Um, so just thinking of ways to how you can incorporate other things into your lawn um, to make it more diverse.
All right, great. Thanks, Carly. Certainly give us lots of options and ideas for converting our lawn into something that is maybe a bit more useful and needs less inputs, like you said. So we did have a couple of questions come in on the chat. So if you're ready for those, I'll fire them at you.
Okay.
All right, so the first question is, you mentioned mowing the pollinator garden. Why, when, and how would you mow it?
Yeah, so in the first year, especially, there can be a lot of weeds in a pollinator garden. And the species that you're trying to establish are pretty tolerant to mowing. So mowing, if you see weeds before they go to seed, and keeping those from going to seed so that they don't reproduce. Um, if it's a smaller garden, you can definitely just pull all the weeds and not mow. If it's larger, it might be worth mowing. Those perennial pollinator plants that you want to establish will still establish even if you mow.
Great, thanks. All right, another question is, if you're planting something like the bunch grasses or maybe some trees and shrubs as a lawn alternative, would you recommend using mulch or something else in the open spaces to avoid weeds coming in?
Yeah, I think mulch can be good in open spaces for sure.
Okay. All right, and another question just came in. If you were to replace grass with clover, what is the process for doing that?
Yeah, so if you were gonna do all clover, like doing the micro clover, I think you would want to take like a sod cutter and take out the sod, um, and then plant that micro clover in after that. Um, and I think for those or any seeding that you do, you're gonna have to water quite a bit at the beginning, but then in the long run, it'll be less water than what your normal lawn grass would be. And a lot of these things I would try like small areas too, especially like with that, you might want to just try an area, see how it works for your lawn and your area, um, and then go from there.
Okay, great. All right. Any other questions from the audience? I'm sure everybody wants to keep discussing this some more.
Carly, I have a question for you. This is Sam. I am wondering, you talked about a little bit the differences between like native bunch grasses and then, rhizomatous grasses and how you wouldn't want to mow the native bunch grasses. Why is that? And does it have a negative impact on those native bunch grasses?
So, I mean, I guess you can mow native bunch grasses, but like I wouldn't do it more than a couple times a year. Because yeah, it can have a negative impact on bunch grasses. But they could be mowed like once or twice a year, just to keep them at bay if you wanted. But yeah, rhizomatous grasses are more tolerant to mowing, because they spread. I guess I don't know if that helped.
Great. All right, there's another question coming in. What are some resources, places you would suggest to buy ground cover seeds such as white clover or micro clover?
I guess you can check around here if there's from seeding places here. I guess I didn't look into that necessarily. I don't know if Haley or Sam knows places to get things like that.
Yeah, I looked into it a little bit for the demonstration garden last year and wasn't able to find a source in the Flathead Valley that sold the micro clover seeds. There are some other types of clover that you can get at CHS. They can make you a clover mix there. But the clover that they sell is used as a cover crop, and it generally grows just a little bit taller than you would maybe want in a lawn, but you can mow it. Just like when we have clover in our lawn when we don't want it to, you can mow the clover and it does just fine. So CHS is an option for some clover, but if you want that micro clover that doesn't have the blooms and is really short growing and great for foot traffic, I was just able to find some online. I did a little bit of Googling and found a company actually in Canada that had well-reviewed seed. All right, Carly, I have another question for you. Do you have any specific recommendations out of all the different options that you gave us? Anything that you would recommend for an area that's prone to drought or an area that is prone to like wildfire, something in the wildland urban interface? I ask because around here, if you live in the wildland urban interface, people will use lawns as a way to prevent the spread of wildfire right up against their house. So I assume we would want to make sure that we weren't, that we were taking that into consideration during fire season.
Yeah. I guess, so things like the ground covers that stay green and are drought tolerant. So like the micro clover that you were talking about. I think some of the, like the thyme and the different mosses will stay green for quite a while. You might have to water them later in the season. Those things would probably stay green around your house if that was the goal. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, another question. Is there any ground prep required when planting clover?
If you were interseeding it into an existing lawn, I'm guessing that's what they're asking. Yeah. So when I was doing some research, people definitely did just like interseed it into their lawn, but to get a better establishment, you'd probably want to mow the grass pretty low. And then you can do so you could seed and then do some harrowing, or if you're going to aerate your lawn at all, aerate it and then seed. Basically trying to get some seed to soil contact is the goal when you're planting. So if it's a pretty sod bound grass, you'd want to do something to get seed to soil contact. Yeah.
Great. Okay, the next question is, what would you recommend for ground cover or plantings near the base of a mature ponderosa and Doug fir trees?
I guess I didn't do as much research on that. I guess things that I just think of when I see in the forest, I would say like Oregon grape would do fine. Maybe some woods rose. But I would look into like the native species that already grow with those plants. Yeah, those are the two that come to mind. I don't know if Haley or Sam, you have any more?
Well, when I think of a mature ponderosa pine forest, I think of that kind of parked out landscape where you've got a lot of native grasses growing under. So if it was an area where you didn't have a lot of weeds, you could probably have really good success with overseeding or doing a fall seeding of the native grass mixes that are available at CHS. All right, next question. Would you recommend topsoil before planting in a cleared forested area?
I guess it would maybe depend on what you're planting. If you're going with like native forested plants, I don't know that you would need topsoil. This is just me thinking off the top of my head, I guess. I guess I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I guess it would kind of depend on what the soil quality was like as well. You know, to the person that asked that question, if you have done a soil test and looked at the health of your soil, that might give you some indication as to whether you would need to do some kind of an amendment to really give your new plantings good success. But overall, I wouldn't say that topsoil is necessary for any sort of native planting.
Like you could maybe do some mulching if you're trying to get some like shrubs established or something. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, while there's a quick break in the conversation, I'm going to go ahead and post the link to that survey. Again, we just ask everybody to please take just a second to answer the couple of questions on that survey, because we'll use it to improve our presentations in the future. And then also some of our grant funding is tied to these surveys. So please do that. That link should be in the comment box for everyone. And then we'll continue to hang out and answer questions as they come in and continue to discuss ideas for lawn alternatives. So, are there any other audience questions that we have right now? Well, I guess, Carly, what would you recommend to somebody who was just starting and didn't really have a green thumb and wanted something that was going to be low maintenance and the easiest alternative to a traditional lawn?
I think I would recommend just starting like on a border or a corner and trying getting like plants from a nursery, planting those. They're going to establish probably better than doing a seeding, and just taking, yeah, a small space, taking out the long grasses and then trying to establish like shrubs or some other forbs, and then probably putting some mulch around that so that you keep the weeds at bay too if you don't have a lot of time to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So alternatively, what would you recommend to somebody that maybe had new construction, or for some reason, like maybe they just did some clearing and they had quite a bit of bare exposed ground? What do you think would be the best alternative there?
I guess it would depend on what the person wanted to use that space for in the future, but that would be then like a new seeding, since you have that soil already pretty much prepared. Either getting grasses or grasses with forbs established, and trying out a planting from seed would probably be good in those areas.
So it's getting a little bit late in the summer. Is there still time this season for people to be converting their lawn and be doing plantings or seeding?
Yeah, I guess I didn't talk about timing. So you could definitely start preparing for a planting now, but plantings generally happen. So you either want to do a dormant planting in the fall, which would be after the last frost. Basically, if you're seeding, you don't want plants to germinate. You want them to overwinter as seeds, germinate in the spring. And so here that'd be like after October 15th, even later some years. And then, or planting in the spring, generally before May 15th and after the last frost. So those would be the timings to plant, and that's both like seeds and planting like container plants mostly. Yeah.
So can you also give us a quick couple of steps on what someone would do if they had an area that had a lot of weeds, and how they would transition it to maybe native grasses or a pollinator plot?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options. I guess one that the Flathead Conservation District is using is solarization. And so that would be putting clear plastic down, and having that down throughout the summer when it's the hottest. So basically what it is you want plants underneath that clear plastic to be growing and then dying basically. And so you want the sun to get through and the heat to get through enough to like basically burn off those plants. And some people try to use like weed fabric and things, which generally like kind of works, but the idea is to let the sun through and not have the heat be absorbed by the black plastic. So clear plastic. Other than that, you can do some rototilling. So you could, throughout the summer, if you wanted to prepare for like a fall planting, you could be preparing your site the whole summer by every couple of weeks when you get plants come up, rototill it. And that's just breaking up those roots. And then the plants won't be as hardy and won't be able to establish as much. I don't know. Do you have any other ways that you guys suggest?
Yeah, I mean, just one way that we suggest too is the sort of combination of an herbicide and tilling. And so you could do, say, if you had like a dense mat of maybe even sod or weeds or a combination, like an old pasture, for example, you could spray an herbicide when things are growing. So probably not right now, but there would be a window in the fall, but spring would be ideal. Spray that herbicide and then wait a few days for everything to kind of absorb that, and then till it. and you break up the root structure like you mentioned, and then it also brings up seed to the surface, the tilling does, that may be in that seed bed, and then you'd actually irrigate it to get that seed in the spring to germinate, and those weeds would come back up, and then you'd spray it again and then till it again. And so it's a kind of a way to hopefully reduce some of the weed seeds that are in your seed bed. So a couple of options there. All right, and then, so we had a couple more questions come in. So the first one is, do deer like clover? And if so, would they decimate the clover?
I mean, I think deer like clover. I guess I don't know the specific answer to that. Like if you were establishing like the micro clover lawn, like if deer would just decimate that, I'm not sure.
I guess I can answer that somewhat just anecdotally. I have an area of my yard that I seeded with crimson clover last year, and it's come up pretty well. It's an area that I didn't want to mow, and I was afraid noxious weeds were going to come in, and I have quite poor soil health. So I seeded that clover last fall. It came in this spring. And I've noticed a couple of places where deer have like nipped the blooming head off the clover. But other than that, I haven't really seen a whole lot of them. So I think the deer would probably come in just like they do into your regular lawn, but I don't think they would tear it up or cause too much damage, at least not from what I've seen in my own lawn. So I don't know that that's a definitive answer for you, but maybe somewhere to start. Okay, and then another question was, which options would you recommend to slow the spread of wildfire closer to structures?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, the species that stay green would be the main thing. So like those micro clovers, or the ground covers that stay green, I guess would be what I would think. I don't know if Haley, if you have any other experience or anything with that.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what my recommendation would be, is if you're looking for something that's kind of a larger landscape area, you know, kind of what you would normally have the square footage wise as a lawn, stick to something that's going to stay green, like Carly said. But if you're looking for more of, say, a landscaping feature, you could pair some of the shrubs or smaller trees or even the bunch grasses, like maybe right around the house, or in a berm or sort of a landscape feature. But you would want to put rock mulch around those instead of a wood mulch, because that wood mulch obviously is flammable. So if you can replace it with rock, then you can still have some of those pretty bunch grasses and flowering shrubs, things like that, and it won't cause too much of a fire hazard. All right, any other questions from the audience? We're gonna keep hanging out for a few minutes, so if you want to chat, we're here. Feel free to put something in the comment box, or also you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. And don't forget to click that link for the survey. I'll go ahead and send it out one more time to everyone, just in case you missed it. It should be in the comment box below now. So while we're hanging out, I'll also just throw out a little sound bite for the Flathead Pollinator Initiative and the webinar that we're having here coming up in a couple of weeks. If anyone is interested in converting part of their lawn or starting a new pollinator plot, we're going to be teaching a workshop on how to seed and do the site prep for pollinator gardens in one of our next webinars. And then also we haven't talked a whole lot about rain gardens, and we have a rain garden webinar coming up. So if you'd like to learn how rain gardens function to remove non-point source pollutants from our water and our stormwater runoff, and how to install one at your house, join us for that webinar as well. It should be a really good one. Michaela's going to be teaching that along with City of Kalispell folks. So lots of good information and lots of programs through Flathead Conservation District that you can use in your own space. Okay. Another couple of questions came in. So, is fall the best time to seed clover?
I think either would work. I would almost say spring for clover, just to get the moisture in there. You could do either though. Do a dormant fall planting or do early spring planting to get all the moisture that you can for those clovers establishing.
But Carly, you think it's probably not the right time right now just because it's so hot that it probably wouldn't germinate well?
No, yeah, you'd want to wait till like late fall or yeah, early spring.
Okay. All right, and another question is, does the Flathead Conservation District have any personnel available to come out and advise on site? And if so, is there anyone in particular? So that's a really great question. We do have staff available to come out to your property and take a look at what you've got going on and give you some technical guidance. And depending on what you're interested in doing at your house, would kind of determine which staff member would come out and talk with you, and would also determine what programs we might have available to offer to you. So also, I think depending on what you were doing, Carly would be available to come out and look at your property too. And if you're super lucky, it might be several of us that come out and look. Just kind of depends on what your goals for your site are. So feel free to reach out to all of us. There's information on our website and how to get a hold of us. You can also submit questions or contact information through Facebook. That's another avenue. But yeah, give us a call, give us a shout out. We'd be happy to talk with you about what you've got going on and come out, look at your site and give you some recommendations. All right, any more questions from anyone? Carly, anything else you want to share?
I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. All right, we got a couple of thank yous coming through on the comment box. Oh, here's a question for you, Carly, that I hadn't thought of. What would you recommend for folks who are planting in an area that was pretty wet and pretty shady, but they didn't want to do a rain garden specifically? They still wanted that look of a lawn. Would some of the mosses work well, or what would somebody do in that situation?
Yeah, I think, yeah, the mosses would be a good option for that. Because mosses are pretty shade tolerant. Yeah, I think, because a lot of, yeah, the species that I went over do like sun. But the mosses were one that were pretty shade tolerant.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen any of those mosses available locally? I know I've seen the creeping thyme at a couple of nurseries, but I haven't been looking for the mosses, so I can't remember for sure if I've seen them.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen them personally, but I also haven't been looking. So they could be around. I've also, on some of the things I was reading, people just said if you already have moss somewhere on your property, you can try to take some of that and establish it somewhere else, type thing. But yeah, I
Interesting.
would think that they would have it around.
Yeah. But I bet that'd probably do better as a spring planting as well. So maybe not the time for it now.
Yeah, I would think so too.
Great. Okay, looks like we still have a few people logged on. They might just be checking out that survey. Hopefully they are. We'll continue to hang out for just a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any other burning questions that they think of. And then after that, we'll go ahead and call it. All right, well, thanks, Carly, so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and loved all the great ideas that you had for lawn alternatives. So great presentation, and see you next time.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Carly. Bye.
Bye.